Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to our latest stories. Before I start, tell me where you are watching me from. I wonder which cities and towns will join me in this memory that will follow me for years. It was one of those late autumn afternoons when the light has that soft, almost golden haze that makes everything look familiar yet slightly unreal. I had just finished the last of my meetings, my desk piled high with the remnants of another busy week. The office was unusually quiet for a Friday, the hum of the air conditioning and the faint tick of the wall clock the only background to the stillness. I had my cup of coffee in hand, nursing it more for the comfort than the caffeine, when I noticed my boss walking toward me. There was something in his step that made me pause. He wasn't rushing, but there was a deliberate weight to the way he moved, like he was carrying something he needed to share. "Hey," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. It was so unlike his usual brisk tone that I immediately straightened in my chair. "Do you have a minute?" I nodded, motioning to the empty chair across from me. The office felt smaller suddenly, the space between us charged with an unspoken tension that wasn't uncomfortable, just different. He sat down, placing his briefcase on the floor, and for a moment we just looked at each other. The city outside the window glimmered in fading sunlight, skyscrapers catching the last rays, casting long shadows across the streets. "I wanted to talk to you about something important," he began, and I noticed the slight tremor in his hand as he reached for his coffee. That small imperfection made him seem human in a way I hadn't allowed myself to see before. Up until then, I had always thought of him as the executive figurehead, untouchable, someone whose emotions were always carefully contained. But now, sitting there with him leaning slightly forward, I could see a different side, someone earnest, maybe even vulnerable. I took a slow sip of my coffee, buying myself a few seconds to gather my thoughts. "Of course," I said. "What's on your mind?" He paused, as if deciding how much to reveal, then let out a quiet sigh. "I've been reflecting a lot lately, about the direction of this office, about leadership, about the people I work with," he said. "And I realized that sometimes, we don't acknowledge the people who make the real difference." His eyes met mine in a way that held no pretense, no hierarchical distance, just an honest connection that made me sit a little straighter. "You mean, me?" I asked, surprised despite myself. My voice sounded lighter than I expected. "Yes," he said simply. "You. Your dedication, your perspective, the way you handle challenges with grace. Sometimes I think I overlook that. I want to change that, not just for you, but for the team. Recognition, it matters more than I thought." The words settled around us like a soft blanket. I realized my heart was racing, not from fear or anticipation, but from a sudden sense of being truly seen, really understood for the work and effort I had put in. In my years in this office, I had always kept a professional distance, wary of letting my personal feelings show. Yet here, across from him, it felt as though a door had opened I didn't even know existed. I found myself speaking before I even thought about it. "I appreciate you saying that. I think, sometimes we forget how much words like these can matter." My hand rested on the edge of the desk, almost reaching toward his, though I didn't move it. The gesture felt intimate, not in a romantic way, but in the way two people share a deep, unspoken acknowledgement of mutual respect. He nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Exactly. And I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to work more closely with me on a new initiative I'm leading. It's something I think aligns perfectly with your strengths. But more than that," he hesitated, his fingers drumming lightly on the desk. "I want to make sure we have open communication. I don't want you to ever feel undervalued or overlooked again." The moment was strangely quiet. The hum of the office, the muted sounds of the city, all faded into the background. I realized I was taking more than just professional notice. I was taking a personal note of this man, this leader, who was showing a side of himself that was genuine, reflective, and unexpectedly vulnerable. There was no expectation here, no pressure, just a sincere effort to connect. And in that, I felt something shift inside me, a recognition that sometimes, authority doesn't have to be distant to be respected. Sometimes, it can be human. "I'd like that," I said finally, a warmth spreading through me that I hadn't anticipated. "I think we could do great things together if we communicate like this." He smiled, a mixture of relief and gratitude. "I'm glad to hear you say that. I was nervous about bringing this up. But I think it's worth it, for both of us, for the office, and for the work we want to achieve. We sat there for a while, talking quietly about the project, our ideas intertwining naturally, laughter occasionally breaking through the thoughtful silences. And somewhere between the discussion of deadlines and strategies, I realized that this conversation had already changed something between us. Not in a dramatic, visible way, but in a subtle, profound one. The connection wasn't just professional, it was human, rooted in understanding and respect. As he stood to leave, I felt a small pang of disappointment that it was over, quickly replaced by a comforting sense of anticipation. This wasn't a fleeting moment. It was a beginning. And as I watched him walk toward the door, briefcase in hand, back straight with renewed purpose, I knew that the memory of this conversation, the quiet honesty, the shared acknowledgement, would linger with me for years to come. The following week arrived with its usual rhythm, the office buzzing in that familiar, almost comforting way. Phones ringing, keyboards clicking, the soft murmur of colleagues moving between desks and meeting rooms. But for me, everything had subtly shifted. The conversation I had shared with my boss seemed to linger in the air around me, making even ordinary moments feel slightly more alive, more significant. I found myself noticing things I hadn't before, the way sunlight slanted across the office floor in the late afternoon, or the gentle hum of the coffee machine as it filled mugs with warmth and aroma. I had prepared for the meeting on the new initiative, organizing notes and sketches, rehearsing explanations, and anticipating questions. And yet, when the moment came, I wasn't nervous. There was a calm focus that came from the trust and acknowledgement we had shared, an understanding that this wasn't about proving myself but about contributing together. He arrived on time, as he always did, but there was a noticeable softness in his demeanor today. He didn't have the usual briskness, the clipped, efficient movements of someone running from task to task. Instead, he carried a quiet attentiveness, one that immediately made me feel seen. Even before he spoke, "Good morning," he said, with a tone that was warm, unhurried, and genuine. "I hope you didn't stay too late yesterday. I know you've been putting in a lot of hours." I smiled, feeling the subtle kindness behind his words. "No, I managed fine. I actually spent a little time reviewing the project details. I'm ready for our discussion." He nodded approvingly, leaning back in his chair and giving me a look that conveyed both confidence and encouragement. "Excellent. Let's go through it together." As we dived into the project details, there was an easy rhythm to our exchange. Ideas flowed naturally, questions were met with thoughtful answers, and even when disagreements arose, they were handled with mutual respect rather than tension. There was something rare about this partnership, an unspoken balance between leadership and collaboration. I could sense that he wasn't just delegating, he was inviting me to contribute in a meaningful way. After an hour of productive discussion, he paused, leaning back and gazing thoughtfully out the window. The city below was alive with movement, cars glinting under the early morning light, pedestrians crossing intersections, a river of humanity flowing in countless directions. There was a reflective silence between us, and I realized that sometimes the most important moments aren't the ones filled with action, but those in which connection deepens quietly. "I've been thinking," he began, turning his attention back to me, "about how much potential we have if we focus on clarity and communication. And not just for the project, but for the office as a whole. I want to build a culture where people feel acknowledged and valued for their contributions. And I think you could help me shape that vision." I felt a warmth spreading in my chest. There was no pressure in his words, only trust and recognition. "I'd like that," I said. "I've always thought that creating that kind of environment is more important than any single project or deadline." He smiled, a small, sincere curve of his lips that made the space between us feel even more genuine. "I knew you'd understand. That's why I wanted to bring you in more closely. Your perspective is invaluable." We spent the next hour brainstorming strategies, discussing team dynamics, and outlining steps to implement the initiative. It was an experience that blended professional engagement with personal connection. Each idea we explored, each solution we proposed, seemed to strengthen not only the project but also the trust between us. There was a subtle rhythm developing, a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine appreciation. By the time the meeting ended, the office had emptied out, leaving us in quiet reflection. He stood, gathering his notes, and looked at me with an intensity that was calm, steady, and reassuring. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything today, and for being someone I can rely on. I hope you realize how much your input matters." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words in the best possible way. "I do. And I hope you know that your leadership, how you're approaching this, it means a lot to me too." There was a pause, the kind that isn't awkward but full of unspoken understanding. Then he smiled again and walked toward the door, leaving behind a quiet sense of anticipation for the days to come. I realized I was thinking not just about the project, but about the human connection that had emerged from it, the awareness that respect, acknowledgement, and honesty could create a space where both personal and professional growth flourished. As I sat back at my desk, I couldn't help but reflect on the unexpected depth of this experience. What had started as a simple conversation had transformed into something that resonated far beyond the boundaries of our office. It was about trust, recognition, and the kind of connection that doesn't require grand gestures, only presence, attentiveness, and a willingness to be seen. And as I watched the sun cast long shadows across the office floor, I knew that this was only the beginning of a journey that would shape not only my work but my understanding of leadership, partnership, and human connection. The following weeks settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and new. Each day brought its own set of challenges and responsibilities, yet beneath the surface of routine, there was a quiet transformation happening. My boss and I continued to work closely on the initiative, and with every discussion, every shared insight, I felt the subtle strengthening of a connection built on trust, respect, and genuine understanding. It was a Wednesday morning when it became clear to me just how much things had shifted. The office was unusually busy, phones ringing in overlapping layers, emails arriving at a steady pace, and colleagues moving quickly between desks with focused urgency. Yet, in the midst of the controlled chaos, he walked into my area with the same calm, deliberate presence that had first drawn me into our meaningful conversations. "Morning," he said, stopping at my desk. His tone was lighter today, infused with a quiet energy that hinted at both determination and thoughtfulness. "Got a few minutes before the next round of meetings?" I gestured toward the chair across from me. "Of course. I was just reviewing the latest numbers and notes from yesterday's brainstorming session." He nodded, settling in. "Good. I wanted to take a moment to reflect on how things are progressing. Not just on the project, but on how we're approaching it together." There was a pause, a thoughtful hesitation in his gaze, as if he were weighing his words carefully before speaking them aloud. I realized that we rarely take the time to acknowledge progress, or the effort behind it. But seeing your dedication, your perspective, your attention to detail, it's inspiring. I felt warmth spreading through me, a comforting recognition that went beyond professional validation. "Thank you," I said softly. "That means more than you might think. It's not just about the project, it's about feeling like your contributions matter." He gave a small, knowing smile. "Exactly. And I've been thinking about how much potential we have if we maintain this level of engagement, not just with the work, but with each other. I don't mean in a personal sense," he added quickly, as if anticipating any misinterpretation, "but in a way that strengthens collaboration and trust." I nodded, appreciating his clarity and the deliberate care with which he spoke. There was something grounding in his words, a sense of stability that made the busiest moments feel manageable. We spent the next hour diving into the intricacies of the initiative, outlining strategies, anticipating challenges, and exploring opportunities for improvement. The discussion was productive, but it was more than that. It was a shared experience, a mutual exchange that deepened our understanding of both the work and each other. As the conversation wound down, he leaned back in his chair, a reflective expression on his face. "You know," he began, his voice quiet, "there's something I've come to realize over the past few weeks. Leadership isn't just about decisions or strategy, it's about connection. About understanding the people you work with and acknowledging the effort, the perspective, and the insight they bring. And I want to make sure I'm doing that better, not just for you, but for everyone on the team." I felt a profound respect for him in that moment, not just as a boss, but as a thoughtful and self-aware individual. "I can see that," I said. "And it's a difference that makes a real impact. Feeling valued and heard, it changes how people approach challenges, how they contribute, and even how they grow." He nodded, his eyes meeting mine with steady sincerity. Exactly. And I want us to continue building that, not just in words, but in actions. I hope you'll help me with that. Your insight, your perspective, your ability to see both the big picture and the details, these are qualities that make a real difference. There was a quiet pause, one of those moments where silence isn't empty but full of reflection. I realized then that what we were sharing went beyond project management or leadership strategy. It was a connection rooted in mutual respect, shared purpose, and the willingness to see each other as complete, capable individuals, not just roles or titles. I'd like that, I said finally. I want to contribute to creating that kind of environment. I think we can make it meaningful for everyone involved. He smiled, the tension of the day melting slightly from his features. I knew you'd understand. That's why I value working with you. It's more than just the work, it's the approach, the perspective, and the trust we're building. The rest of the day passed in a productive blur, yet I carried with me a lingering sense of calm and focus. Even in the midst of tight deadlines and constant demands, there was a quiet reassurance in knowing that this partnership, this connection, was rooted in something substantial. It wasn't fleeting or superficial, it was grounded in shared respect, understanding, and the kind of trust that made challenges feel navigable and accomplishments feel truly shared. By the time the office emptied for the evening, I found myself reflecting on the subtle evolution of our professional relationship. What had begun as a simple acknowledgement of effort had transformed into a meaningful connection that extended far beyond routine tasks. It was a lesson in leadership, in collaboration, and in the profound impact of recognition and respect. And as I shut down my computer and gathered my things to leave, I felt a quiet anticipation for what was to come, knowing that this journey, and the growth it promised, was only beginning. The weeks that followed carried a quiet transformation through the office, a subtle shift in energy that I hadn't anticipated but had come to appreciate deeply. The initiative we had been working on together began to take shape in ways that were both practical and inspiring, but more than that, the environment itself had changed. Conversations were more thoughtful, collaboration was more fluid, and there was an unmistakable sense of mutual respect and understanding that had started to ripple through the team. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and cast long, warm rays across the polished floors, I found myself once again sitting across from him in my office. We had just finished reviewing the latest project updates, and for a moment, there was a pause, a quiet interlude between the flurry of tasks and meetings. He leaned back in his chair, eyes focused on the sunlight filtering through the window blinds, and I realized that these moments of reflection had become something I looked forward to almost as much as the work itself. I wanted to take a moment, he said, his voice calm and deliberate, to acknowledge not just the work, but the way we've approached it together. I think it's rare to find someone who contributes not just skill, but perspective, insight, and integrity. You've been instrumental in making this initiative what it is, and I want you to know how much I value that. I felt a quiet swell of gratitude in my chest, a recognition that his words were more than formal acknowledgement, they were genuine, thoughtful, and heartfelt. Thank you, I said softly. I've appreciated the opportunity to work this closely with you. And I've learned a lot from the way you approach challenges, how you lead with both vision and care. He smiled, and it wasn't the kind of casual smile reserved for polite exchanges. It was a small, sincere curve of the lips that conveyed recognition and mutual respect. That means more than you know. I've realized that leadership isn't just about decisions or strategies, it's about people. About listening, acknowledging, and fostering growth. And I can honestly say that working with you has reminded me of that. I nodded, feeling the depth of his reflection resonate with me. There was a profound sense of understanding in his words, an honesty that made the connection between us feel significant without ever overstepping boundaries. It's rare to find that kind of openness, I said. And I think it makes a difference, not just for the work, but for the people we work with, and for the environment we create together. We spent the next hour discussing final adjustments to the initiative, brainstorming ways to encourage collaboration and recognition across the team, and reviewing strategies to ensure everyone felt seen and valued. The discussion was rich, thoughtful, and grounded in mutual respect, a conversation that balanced professionalism with authenticity, insight with reflection. It was the kind of exchange that left me energized, motivated, and quietly inspired. As the day came to a close, he stood and gathered his materials, glancing at me with a thoughtful expression. "Thank you for everything you've contributed, not just to the project, but to the way we've approached it. Your perspective, your integrity, and your dedication have made a real difference. And I hope you know that this is just the beginning. There's so much more we can accomplish together." I smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction and connection. "I know. And I'm grateful to be part of it. I've learned so much from working with you, not just about the work, but about how meaningful collaboration can be." There was a quiet pause, a moment that didn't need words. It was an understanding, a recognition of mutual respect, growth, and shared purpose. And in that stillness, I realized that the journey we had embarked on together wasn't defined by deadlines or tasks, but by the emotional resonance of working with someone who valued insight, honesty, and integrity as much as I did. As he left the office, I watched him walk toward the elevator, his posture upright yet relaxed, carrying with him a sense of thoughtfulness and purpose. I turned back to my desk, the sunlight now softer, more golden, casting gentle shadows across the room. I reflected on the past weeks, the conversations, the collaboration, the shared insights, and I realized that this experience had changed me in ways I hadn't anticipated. It had reminded me of the power of acknowledgement, of listening, and of mutual respect. It had shown me that professional relationships could carry depth and meaning, rooted not in hierarchy or expectation, but in trust, understanding, and genuine care for each other's perspective. And as I gathered my things to leave for the evening, I carried with me a quiet sense of satisfaction, a recognition that true growth, both personal and professional, comes from connection, reflection, and the willingness to see and be seen. Walking through the empty hallways of the office, I realized that the lessons of the past weeks would stay with me for years. It wasn't just about the initiative, the deadlines, or the meetings. It was about understanding what it truly means to work with someone, to build something meaningful together, and to recognize the value in each other. And in that realization, I felt a sense of peace, gratitude, and quiet anticipation for the future, a future shaped not only by ambition and achievement but by the profound impact of connection, respect, and shared purpose.